In this question, we're given three representations of a linear relationship. We're given a table of values, an equation, and a graph. And we have to determine the initial value for each. And then we have to determine if any of them represent partial variation. Let's start by looking at the first one, ski slope hill. What we can see is that after 1 hour of skiing, it costs us $10. For 2 hours of skiing, it costs us $20. 3 hours, $30. 4 hours, $40, etc. They tell us it's linear, so we know it's a consistent rate of change. And so if we look at the difference between successive amounts, we can see it's consistent. The time goes up by 1 each time, and then the cost will go up by $10 each time. Well, from this we can make some predictions. If it was 6 hours of skiing, if we went an extra hour, then we'd expect to pay $60. But let's go backwards. Let's say if we just didn't ski at all, if we started at 0 hours, what would the cost be? Well, we'd know that if we put in 0 hours here, that the cost would be $0, because we know that the amount of cost would go up by 10 each time. So for 0 hours, we don't pay anything. For 1 hour, we pay $10, or another plus 10 if you like from here. It's got to be consistent if it's linear. So what we can tell from this is that the initial value is 0. In other words, when time is 0, the cost is 0, so the initial value is 0. If we weren't sure, we could always graph it. Let's do a little mini graph here. Okay, if we start plotting the points, say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hours, and then this would be 10, 20, 30, 40, $50. So for 1 hour it's $10, for 2 hours it's $20, for 3 hours it's $30, for 4 hours it's $40, 5 hours it's $50. And if we join those dots, we get a straight line. And then we look, where does it cross the vertical axis here? It crosses right at 0, so our initial value is 0. Alright, so let's take a look at the second option, mountain ski. Here we're given an equation. So we know that in general, cost here, or any linear relationship, would be given by rate plus the initial value. Well, if we look at this equation here, the rate is the 8t part. And it represents the part of the equation that has the independent variable t in it. What we also notice is that there isn't any initial value. Well, what we can say then is that we could add 0 to this, and our initial value would be 0. Adding 0 to an equation doesn't change its value. So here we see that the initial value then for this option is also 0. Again, if we weren't sure, let's draw a graph. So the horizontal axis would be time. Let's put in a couple of times, 1 hour, 2 hours. The vertical axis would be the cost. So if I put 1 into this equation, 8 times 1 would be $8. So the cost for 1 hour would be $8. And if we put in 2 into the equation, 8 times 2 would be 16. The cost for 2 hours would be $16. So again, for 1 hour it would be $8. For 2 hours it would be $16. And let's draw a line. And if we do this again, we see that the line crosses the vertical axis here at 0. So the initial value is 0. And of course, we could always put in 0 into our equation. 8 times 0 would give us 0. So the initial cost would be 0. Initial value, 0. Okay, so let's look at our third option, Snowway Adventures. Here they give us a graph. An initial value is where the line crosses the vertical axis, the cost axis. So if we follow the line down to the beginning, we can see that it crosses at $15. So our initial value here is 15. In other words, they're going to charge us $15 even before we ski, and then they're going to charge us an hourly rate on top of that. Okay, so now we've figured out the initial value for each option. Next we have to determine which of these represents partial variation. Well, partial variation occurs when the line does not go through the origin, or does not go through the point 0, 0, or does not have an initial value of 0. Okay, if we look at our first option, The line goes through 0, 0, has an initial value of 0, therefore it's not partial variation. This is actually direct variation. Same for option 2. Goes through the point 0, 0, initial value of 0, it's direct variation. Whereas our third option here does not go through the origin. It starts with initial value of 15. Therefore, it represents partial variation. And there you go.